Hello and welcome to the Liverpool.com podcast. I'm James Martin, joined today by Matt Addison. Before we start, a message from NordVPN. To get the best discount off your NordVPN plan, go to nordvpn.com/bloodred and our link will give you 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. There's a no risk with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the podcast episode description box. Right, so now we've told you about that, let's get underway with today's show. Well, we'll be looking at the winners and losers of the Arne Slot regime so far. I mean, Liverpool certainly have been winners for the most part with just the one sort of blemish on the record, I suppose, against Nottingham Forest. Other than that, it's all been going remarkably well. Another win last night against Bologna in the Champions League. But in terms of the players, who has stood out and who has maybe still got something to prove to the new boss, under the new boss? Matt, I think the only place to start really is Ryan Gravenberch, isn't it? Who has been, nothing short of a revelation really under Slot.
Yeah, it's been a real surprise. I think Arne Slot said that himself last week. Obviously he's a big fan of Ryan Gravenberch, but he said even he has been surprised by how good he's been, particularly with the off-the-ball stuff. I think that was the big question, wasn't it? I think we know he's a very technically gifted player. He's very, very good at dictating and passing and that kind of side of things. You can understand why he would fit into that role. The question really was, could he do the other stuff? There's still bigger tests to come. Anybody who's had a look at the fixture list really for the next 2 months for Liverpool will see game after game, which is going to be more tricky, I think, than anything that they've played up to this point. But obviously we're analysing it after a period of time in which he's played 7 or 8 games and looked really good in each of them. You can only really judge it on what he's done so far. And I think there are signs there that, the tackles, the interceptions, that side of things really has been pretty impressive as well. So there's no real reason to think that it won't continue, even though there's much bigger tests in terms of, being able to get bodies around him, or Real Madrid have got so much quality in those areas. It will be different to facing teams like Bologna and even Nottingham Forest, where Liverpool weren't particularly good. It's going to be more difficult than that for them in the next few weeks. But yeah, from what we've seen so far, I think Ryan Gravenberch is quite clearly and obviously the most improved player under Arne Slot so far. It's been a pleasant surprise. But yeah, it's certainly been a surprise, I think, in terms of just how quickly he's got used to it. And hopefully that can continue. We did know that he was a good player when he came in, but I think to go from 12 Premier League starts last season, he's already got 6 this season. He's going to comfortably surpass that, assuming he doesn't get injured at any point this season, which you've got to keep your fingers crossed for him, because he's been, as you say, an absolute revelation so far for Liverpool.
Yeah, the biggest surprise to me there is that he made 12 Premier League starts last season, to be honest. It felt like he was even more peripheral than that. But something about the new system and the new manager just seems to have really clicked with him, doesn't it? The way he takes the ball on the turn, so positive, he uses his body so well, just the sort of almost the water carrier function, as it's sometimes called, that kind of ability to link the phases together, I suppose. He gets the ball off the defence and then just drives when the space is there, and can create the space as well with those just really clever movements that look so small, but they're so big in opening up the game, opening up the pitch. It's been great to watch. I mean, there have been some very lofty comparisons, which, as you say, we maybe need to wait a few more games before we can really double down on. But I've heard names like Patrick Vieira mentioned. It's been that sort of start to the season. It's been absolutely incredible. And just before we move on from him, I suppose, where do you think that leaves us in terms of January? I mean, Martin Zubimendi was speaking to the press yesterday and said that fans can rest easy in the winter market. So it looks like he's still planning on staying put. But do you think if Liverpool did identify another number 6, they'd be looking in that position again, or do you think they've sort of found their answer now?
I think it's really tricky. I wrote one of my stories from Anfield last night was on that, actually, in terms of the dilemma that it gives them. I think obviously they looked at Zubimendi and you can see why that was the case. He's clearly a very good player, but I think having not gone for an alternative because they didn't think there was anybody as good as him elsewhere on the market, I think to find an upgrade on what Liverpool have already got has only become more difficult at the start of this season. When you look at how good Gravenberch has been, if they couldn't find an alternative to Zubimendi a few games ago. It's not going to be any easier at this point, given how well he's been playing. But I still think there's a good opportunity at some point to bring in another player in that position. Obviously, Wataru Endo is the other side of 30, so he's not going to go on forever. I think there's a bit of a question mark in terms of how much Arne Slot thinks that he's suited to his system. Obviously, Liverpool had interest in him in the summer, didn't end up moving, but we've not seen a great deal of him since. I think that's possibly because of the sort of technical side of things, the passing, the ability on the ball. And it's such an important position in the way that Liverpool play now that there's more emphasis on the centre-backs, the goalkeeper and that number 6 to start those moves. I think it's got to be somebody who's really, really elite in those areas as well as the defensive part of the game. But it does make it tricky to find another option to bring in. But if it was me, I would still be looking to see if there's somebody on the market. It would be interesting to see what kind of player, maybe what age of player that they went for, what kind of profile it would be in terms of that. I'm not quite sure. But I think what I would say is there's no bad way of having two good players in each position. I think we've seen from Luis Diaz and Cody Gakpo this season, if you've got two players who I think it's fair to say are broadly similar in terms of their quality and their level, how one can push the other one forward. I wonder as well, there was obviously interest in Anthony Gordon over the summer. There's been plenty of links with forwards as well. I wonder how much that has impacted them and made them knuckle down even further and just given them that extra little push, I think. So there's no immediate need. It's not such a glaringly obvious transfer need for Liverpool when January opens compared to when it was in the summer because of Gravenberch. But it certainly wouldn't put me off if there was another, whether it was Zubimendi, which I don't think it will be, or somebody else who was of a similar level became available. I'd certainly still be looking to have a decent look at one or two of those players just to bring them in and further add to it. Because, as I say, we don't know how Gravenberch is going to be at the end of this season, having played what will be more football than any other season in his career. If you've got two of those options, that can only be better than having one, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, you touched on him there, but I think Luis Diaz is another one to sort of drill down into if we're talking about the winners under Slot. I mean, it's a strange one because he looks like a very similar player to what he's always been at Anfield in many ways, but he's just found that end product, hasn't he? The one thing that has always been slightly missing. I don't know whether that's just a hot streak or whether it's a confidence thing, how much we can attribute to Slot and how much is just Diaz, off his own back, making those improvements. But it's been a welcome change, that's for sure, hasn't it?
Yeah, he's been excellent, and I think most people probably thought that Cody Gakpo would be ahead of him in the pecking order when the season kicked off. But I think it's been the right decision to go with Diaz. I think there was some talk last week, I can't remember whether it was him who spoke about it or possibly Arne Slot, but around the work that John Heiting has been doing with him one-on-one in training sessions and stuff behind the scenes, whether that's a bit of a slight difference in terms of what he is able to do in that final third. He seems to have just a little bit of extra time and a bit more control in the way that he's finishing things. It's something that you'd like to see more of, I think, from Darwin Nunez, really, in terms of just having that poise and calmness in front of goal. He's definitely found that, which he didn't really have last season. But I wonder as well whether there's almost a tactical element to it as well. It does feel to me like he's in more space. He's got more time because he's not maybe got quite so many bodies in front of him. It feels like he's possibly starting a little bit further wider and giving himself a bit more opportunity there to come inside and take shots. When he's getting those shots in the penalty area, it doesn't necessarily feel like there's five bodies in front of him, whereas I think last season, there was often times where he'd get into those positions and have shots, but they'd be blocked. This season, it seems like he's getting a few more clear-cut opportunities. I'm not quite sure 100% what it is and why that is the case, but I think that's definitely the difference, really. He's got a little bit more time and space in those good positions, and hopefully it's not just a hot streak. I think it is something that we've seen from obviously him when he was at Porto. That was the kind of player that he was. He was never really, really elite numbers in terms of goal scoring, more so in terms of creativity, but he's getting in the positions often enough that you'd think he can continue that. And I think even if he was to dip a little bit, I think you'd expect Cody Gakpo to then come in and be able to do something similar. I think He's obviously not scored as many goals this season, but that's because he's not had as many minutes on the pitch as Luis Diaz. It's just a perfect balance, I think, in terms of having those forward options. If one of them does start to decline a little bit, the other one can come in, and as we said before, it can kind of push each other to go on to new levels. So I think it's definitely answered a big question. I think most people were welcome in terms of the Anthony Gordon links because he could get those extra numbers. That was the only difference really between Gordon and Diaz last season. I don't think there's necessarily a need to go and do something like that now. Obviously, Diaz is still under contract at Liverpool for a while. Obviously, Cody Gakpo has not long come in. So it just feels like a really nice position to be in, really. And yeah, it's been a welcome change. As I say, I'm not quite sure why it suddenly clicked for Luis Diaz, but whatever it is for him and for Gravenberch, I think those two are the two obvious ones, really, in terms of standing out so far.
Yeah, that's definitely the theory, isn't it, in terms of the forwards kind of driving each other on to greater heights. And like you say, we have possibly seen that in action with Diaz. I suppose just looking at the other side of the coin, have we maybe seen one of the issues with having, now you would say 6 pretty elite forwards on the books that the ones who aren't getting the starts are maybe prone to, stagnating a little bit with the opportunities coming quite sort of few and far between. Snatching minutes off the bench, it's quite difficult. I mean, not so much with Chiesa because he was always going to be managed carefully with his minutes anyway. But I suppose the big one to talk about would be Darwin Nunez. And it's too early to be panicking or anything like that. But it was only his second start of the season last night. He would have been hoping for more than that by this point. And just, I suppose, what we've seen from him as well is how important momentum, rhythm is. And I suppose this kind of balance of the forwards at the moment does seem to be making it hard for him to build up anything like that. So, I mean, how do you see things going for him? Do you think he's... I suppose we'd agree he's still got time to come good under Slot, but do you think there's a clear path for him to do so?
Yeah, it's been a hard start to the season, I think, for him. He's probably been a little bit frustrated. He didn't look particularly happy when he was took off yesterday. He seemed wanting to carry on and try and do a little bit more, but he was pretty quiet. I think Liverpool started pretty well the first 15 or 20 minutes against Bologna, but then after that tailed off, and I think you could probably say that for him as an individual as well. But I think what I would say is it's been hard for him, as you say, to gain momentum for a couple of reasons, really. He's obviously started the season not in the team, having come back a little bit later because of the Copa America, but the Copa America as well, he obviously picks up the ban, so he's not been able to play for Uruguay. So even during the international breaks, whilst the other players, have gone away, and Cody Gakpo has looked brilliant in the September international break, for example, and has obviously come back and been able to build on that confidence whenever he's been given the chance for Liverpool. Luis Diaz, the same, has gone away with Colombia. Darwin Nunez hasn't had that. He's not going to have that in this international break either. So he's not impressed that much when he has played, aside from the goal against Bournemouth, which was brilliant. But then at the same time, he's not really had a great deal of minutes. The only way that you are going to improve and get better in terms of those numbers is to have that consistent time on the pitch. I think that will come. Probably there's, without being too pessimistic, there's probably a period in the season when Diogo Jota is going to get an injury. I think there's probably a period in the season coming up where there's so many matches and so many big games that even if Darwin Nunez isn't starting every week, he's going to get at least half an hour off the bench because Diogo Jota simply can't play 3 games in a week, 90 minutes, when it's Chelsea, Arsenal and Leipzig in the space of 7 or 8 days, for example. There's going to be opportunities for him coming. I think it is a big season for him, though. I think he's got to start to take those opportunities at some point. If we get to January and he's still kind of in the same position that he's in now, maybe then that starts to become a little bit of a worry. It's too soon to say that at the moment, of course. And I always sort of caveat the conversation with Nunez of, he scored 18 goals last season. It wasn't, a poor campaign by any stretch of the imagination. He's obviously missed lots of chances. It should have been a lot more goals than that. But there is a player there to be utilised. I think a little bit like Diogo Jota, unfortunately for both of them, really, when they're out of the team, they do take a little bit of a time. It's not like they come back and they're instantly back to their levels. They take 3, 4, 5 games to get back up to that point and get into the swing and get into the groove of things again. And I think for whichever one of them at this moment in time wasn't going to be in the team, if it had been the other way around, I think it would have been the same for Jota as well. It's just about getting 2 or 3 starts in a row, really, getting a couple of goals. The confidence and all the rest of it will start to come at that point. But it's hard to make the case, I think, for that, really. When you're looking at the games to come, when you look at what's happened so far this season, it's certainly not wrong from Arne Slot to think that Diogo Jota is the more reliable option. He's the one that I think most people would pick as Liverpool's number 1, number 9 at this moment in time. So it's tricky. It's a bit of a double-edged sword, really. You've got to have those minutes to show what you can do, but I don't think there's necessarily a run of 5 games where Darwin Nunez starts 4 of them. I just don't really see that coming unless there's an injury, which we hope obviously isn't the case.
Yeah, I think you're right. From his personal perspective, he won't be hoping for that because he wants the team to do well like everyone does. But that does look to be the likeliest way that he gets that kind of sustained run that he needs really to showcase what he can do on the Slot. I suppose he'll be hoping that the upcoming international break will work in his favour. To this, as you mentioned, he's got that ban for Uruguay, so he should have that time to sort of knuckle down in training. He'll be sort of building up that rhythm where maybe others will be away. So maybe there'll be an element of that which works in his favour. I suppose the kind of opposite of pre-season for him, where he was a fairly late arrival back from the Copa America. Similar story with Gakpo, really. They both just sort of arrived on the back foot purely because of the international schedule, and then they struggled to get back in the team since then. I've been a bit surprised by that element of Slot's management, actually. It's not a bad thing or a good thing, really, just something I wasn't expecting is how sort of keen he is to put out this settled team. It's not something you really see too much in the modern game. You look at, Man City, I suppose, were the not the pioneers, but certainly one example you'd always go to in terms of you never quite know who's going to be starting any given week with the depth and the quality of that depth and Guardiola's tendency to shake things up. But Liverpool have basically just been going, right, these are the best 11 performers at the moment, and we're going to put them out as much as we can, as much as their bodies physically allow, I suppose. And it's working at the moment. We haven't seen any real injury problems. We've got, obviously, Chiesa has picked up this issue, not thought to be a major one. He could even be in contention again for the weekend. And Harvey Elliott has been unfortunate as well. He's expected back after the next international break. But in terms of the players who have actually been getting the heaviest game loads, no problems so far. So, long may that continue, but maybe not for the sake of Nunez's prospects. I suppose this one feels harsher, but I suppose along similar lines, you'd say Gakpo hasn't really been much of a winner under Slot so far. He's one who I had high hopes for. I picked the wrong Dutchman to thrive under Slot, clearly. Should have gone with Gravenberch. But he had a great Euros, didn't he? He came back and there were the reports that Slot has spoken to him and said he also sees him primarily as that left winger where he was doing really well for the Netherlands. So it all seemed to be in place for him. I suppose the answer to why he's not had much success so far is simply Luis Diaz, is it?
Yeah, I think so. I think when he has played, he looked good. He looked very good against Milan. He's obviously scored a couple of goals against West Ham when I think he was probably, even before scoring those 2 goals late on in the game, he was probably Liverpool's best player on that occasion. So he's not doing anything wrong. I think his situation is probably slightly different to Nunez in that when we have seen Nunez in small periods, he hasn't really done a great deal. I don't think you can really make that argument with Cody Gakpo. I think there will be opportunities for him to come into the team. It's interesting that you mentioned the lack of rotation. I'm fascinated to see what Arne Slot does for the 12:30 on Saturday, because I think if this was a Jurgen Klopp team, we'd have seen probably 5 or 6 changes midweek and then 5 or 6 more changes for the Saturday because of the short turnaround. It will be interesting to see, just Curtis Jones, Cody Gakpo, those kind of players, do they come into the team for Saturday? But I don't think you'd be worried at all, really, if Gakpo was one of those. I think you can look at his situation in 2 ways, really. It looks like he is nailed on now as a left winger and he's not going to be playing anywhere else. I think there's probably been a little bit too much rotation in terms of his position. He's probably been a little bit too versatile for his own good, really, since he's come into Liverpool. They tried to make him into a bit of a false 9. They've played him in midfield. There's a possibility, of course, that we see him in that number 10 position under Arne Slot at some point, but it looks like he's going to be left wing or nothing, which obviously in the short term means that his minutes have been limited. I suspect in the long term it might work out for the best for him, because when we have seen him, he's looked really good. I think that's comfortably his best position. That's where he's looked most natural. That's where he can cut inside and score those goals and create and do what he did with his previous club. So I think it's probably for the best for him that if he's not playing left wing, he's not playing elsewhere, because he does feel to me like a bit of a momentum player, a bit like Nunez as well, I think, in terms of that confidence and just getting into a bit of a groove. I think for him to do that, when he plays, he's got to play off that left-hand side. If he had come into the team, say, for the West Ham game, but played as a number 9, for example, and maybe not made as much of an impact or not look quite as good as what he does when he's in his best position, I think that possibly could have been more detrimental than just not playing at all, if that had to be the alternative. So, yeah, short term, it's not been ideal for him, but I guess when Liverpool are playing 3 big hitters, as they are going to be for the majority of the next few weeks after the international break, I think we'll probably start to see a little bit more of him. I think it's probably not the worst thing either for him to be a player who comes on with half an hour left. If Diaz needs a rest and he comes on at that point in the game, you can still get yourself a goal. You can still help Liverpool see the game out. It's not going to be the case that they're 2-0 up and cruising for the last half an hour of matches when it's Arsenal, Chelsea, Real Madrid, Brighton. It's going to be the case, I think, that the last half an hour of games is going to become more important. So that substitution and that kind of role off the bench isn't necessarily the same role as what it's been so far this season. So I'm certainly not worried by him. And for me, it's a massive positive that he's only playing on that left-hand side. I think that's what he needs to become the best version of himself. And it's up to him then to show that the best version of Cody Gakpo is better than probably the best we've seen of Luis Diaz so far in his Liverpool career. So, yeah, I'm all for the competition, and I'm glad to see that he's settled on that side, because I think that's definitely something that's held him back so far in his Liverpool career.
Yeah, he has looked very good when we have seen him. I was at that West Ham game, and I agree. I think he was the best performer even before those goals. It was a strange sort of 5-1. I was at both the 5-1s from this season and last season. They're very different games. It was much more nervy for most of the contest, but no, it was a good performance from everyone, but particularly from Cody Gakpo, and definitely deserved those goals. So it does feel, like you say, a little bit more like his moment is coming in this Slot team. It's just a matter of the timing, which maybe you couldn't quite say about Nunez just yet. So possibly not too much of a loser under Slot, just biding his time. But if we move back from the front line and into the midfield, I don't want to spend ages talking about Endo. I think you touched on him earlier. I think, again, it's one of those where even before a ball was kicked, we thought he doesn't look necessarily the best fit for a Slot style. And obviously with Ryan Gravenberch doing so well, that pretty much explains that. I mean, you can obviously add some more if you want to, but I think that's fairly self-explanatory. I think the more interesting one is who you also mentioned just now, Curtis Jones. And going back to that West Ham game, he did get a chance there, and it was an interesting one because he got a very nice assist, has to be said, but there were plenty of times where there just seemed to be a little bit of frustration in the stands, in the crowd, where he would maybe take one touch too many, he would do something good and then just hold on to the ball, maybe not get his head up. And I feel like it's something he has been getting better at, in the last couple of years, even under Klopp. But he spoke about his excitement, didn't he, when Arne Slot came in? He said, this style of play suits me better than anything I've had so far. Do you think he's done enough to show that, or do you think he's had the chances to show that so far?
I always find it hard to assess him, really, because I'm still not quite sure what kind of player he is. And I think he is definitely one, similar to what we've spoken about with other players earlier in the show, about needing regular minutes, regular games. If he gets 5 or 6 games on the spin, I think then we see that decision-making. We see slightly different sort of versions of him. I thought, you're right to mention the crowd against West Ham. I thought that was quite harsh on him, to be honest. I think he's always a player that takes those touches and is almost encouraged to hold the ball. And, Arne Slot spoke about it in the summer when he explained his philosophy to the Liverpool fans. He wants players to not just play passes and give the ball away. He wants them to hold on to it and wait for the right moments and be patient. So I think that's kind of what Curtis Jones brings to the table. That's why you have him in the team, to be able to do that. I do think people get frustrated by him a little bit easier than maybe one or two other players on the pitch. I think there's a little bit of confirmation bias. Definitely when he first came into the Liverpool first team, that was a problem, but I don't think it's necessarily the same level of problem of holding onto the ball a little bit too long now compared to what it was 2 or 3 years ago. I do think he's improved in terms of that. It's just a case of where does he come into the Liverpool team. I think it's been really hard to assess Dominic Szoboszlai so far this season. I think he's probably the one that you'd look at if Curtis Jones was to come into the team out of that midfield three, who'd be the one that drops out. Clearly, it's not going to be Gravenberch. I think Alexis McAllister probably at his best is Liverpool's best midfielder, so it's probably not going to be him. And that leaves that number 10 position, really. It's hard to see Curtis Jones getting into the team week in, week out right now. I thought Szoboszlai played better than what he has done for a long time against Bologna. I thought he was really excellent. And I think there's a bit of a question mark between the two of those really in different ways. Curtis Jones obviously needs to show that he can remain injury-free and be consistent on that front. But I think Szoboszlai is one that has been a little bit mixed at times this season. I think he looks much better against better opponents, which I think might be a little bit of a problem for him, given that Liverpool in most matches, probably at least 2/3 of the games, most of the games at Anfield in particular, Liverpool are going to need to break down a low block. I think we saw a bit of a problem with that, obviously, against Nottingham Forest. He wasn't the only one that performed poorly, but I just have a little bit of a question mark against the lesser teams of whether Szoboszlai is the right player. I think he's definitely the right player for Bologna when they came out to attack. Obviously, Milan, Manchester United, the teams like that where there's more space, you're going to need those physical qualities a little bit more. I think he suits those matches, but maybe there's an argument that against a Nottingham Forest, Curtis Jones, or I think Harvey Elliott probably would have been the answer if he'd have been fit for that one. You'd have brought him into the team, certainly off the bench at half-time or soon after, given the way that the game was going, but obviously he wasn't available. So I think there's a bit of a question mark in terms of what the long-term future is in that number 10 position. I think Szoboszlai has the shirt at the moment, but I am a fan of Curtis Jones. I think he can make a bit of an impact. It's just a case really of the opponents that Liverpool have got coming up, maybe up to this point in the season, have probably favoured Jones more than Szoboszlai to a certain extent, but we've not really seen that reflected in the minutes. Maybe the matches that are coming possibly might suit Dominic Szoboszlai a little bit more. So if you could mould the two together and have that sort of decision-making in the final third, but then add the off-the-ball stuff that Szoboszlai does, the ability to kind of drive forward with the ball as well. And, obviously he is creative and he does kind of have that ability to pick a pass, but he doesn't quite have that guile, I don't think, in the final third at this moment in time anyway. So it's almost a little bit mixed with both of them, really. I'm a big fan of Curtis Jones. It's just a case of, at the moment, Dominic Szoboszlai is preferred, and possibly that might be the case, I think, for the next few weeks.
Yeah, I think that's all fair. It's been an interesting one with Szoboszlai, like you say. He's had his moments, but you can certainly question the end product at times. I thought the commentary was harsh last night. There was one where he put it just wide of the post. I think it was described as Salah putting it on a plate for him, which certainly wasn't the case. It was not an easy chance. But more generally, yeah, you would probably want to see more from him when he's being played, like you say, as that most advanced in the midfield three. But that doesn't mean he's not doing good things. And like you say, maybe those good things are more on display against certain opponents. So that's one for Slot to solve in terms of how to get the best out of him, whether he's a player for some games and not others. He does have a squad to call on. Maybe we'd have seen more of Harvey Elliott if he'd been fit during this run of games, so that's been a bit of a shame. Just before we finish up, I suppose we should have a quick look at the defence, maybe pick a winner and a loser in there. I suppose the loser so far has been Joe Gomez. There's no two ways about it, really. You can mention Jarell Quansah as well, I suppose, but Gomez is the one who'll be maybe looking at it and thinking, right, come January, if nothing's changed, I need to have another look at leaving. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, I mean, for me, Joe Gomez would be my second choice left back. I'd rather see Joe Gomez in that position than Kostas Tsimikas, just on what we've seen in the last couple of seasons. I think he's a better option there. I think he's an unbelievably good centre-back as well. I think he starts for most teams in the Premier League and has obviously been a little bit unlucky. He's one of those that you'd look at, and I thought in the summer that Liverpool maybe needed one more defender, but the fact that they don't seem to be rotating a great deal, maybe suggests that probably isn't going to be the case, that they get one more in. But I wouldn't want to see Joe Gomez leave Liverpool. I think there was obviously interest. There was a conversation to be had during the summer for him, but he's just so good. I don't want to damn him with faint praise, but the fact that you can play across all four of the back four positions, I just think that's completely invaluable. Obviously, he's very, very good to play in his favourite position in the centre of the defence, but on either side, I think at full-back as well, you wouldn't be concerned if Joe Gomez was playing there for Liverpool. So he's been a loser in terms of his playing time, for sure. I just hope that there's enough minutes really between now and maybe not January, because I can't necessarily see him going then, but between now and the end of the season and next summer, you hope that there's enough minutes there for him that he can be convinced really in terms of playing. And obviously the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of a winner, I think it's hard to look past. Virgil van Dijk so far, I think, has been exceptional. I think he's adapted to the way that Arne Slot wants him to play. The centre-backs are being asked to do a little bit more in terms of the build-up. And probably Konate as well is another one who's done very, very well. He obviously makes the mistake against Wolves, but I thought he was excellent apart from that. And the moment where he gets the yellow card, I think apart from that, he was pretty much spotless and has been very, very good in terms of on the ball as well. I think that was always the question mark with him, was can teams let him have the ball, and he isn't that dangerous, whereas someone like Joel Matip, for example, in the past has been able to help Liverpool build and do that. But I've seen certainly a lot more from Konate as well in terms of that. So yeah, two opposite ends of the spectrum, but I just hope that there's enough minutes really spread across that defence across the course of the campaign.
Yeah, he's still no Joel Matip on the ball, let's be clear about that. But no one ever will be. So it's been a great start for both of those centre backs. I think at the end of the Klopp era, it would be fair to say that Konate had just lost his place on merit to Kwanzaa. To be honest, there were some fitness issues, but like I say, by the end of the campaign, they were both available, and Kwanzaa was getting the nod there. And obviously, Kwanzaa unlucky in that first game. I don't think he was hooked for being especially poor individually. It was just Slot needed to make a change. That was the change he went for, and Konate's done nothing to lose the place since. So unfortunate for Kwanzaa, but certainly well deserved for Konate, who's been very good. Sort of shown that potential that Liverpool saw in him when they signed him to be, that long term solution really in the back line. He's been great. And I suppose you could mention Trent as well. He's maybe not being as much of a pronounced winner as maybe Van Dijk or Konate, but I think I'm on the whole liking what I'm seeing from him more than over the last season and a half, really. He seems to have a bit more of a settled role in the team and seems to be benefiting from it. We saw for the Salah goal last night against Bologna, it was pretty sort of trademarked Alexander-Arnold in one sense, in that it was a fullback's action really, wasn't it? He overlapped him, he opened the space, and Salah could score the kind of goal that he's not really scored many of for quite a long time now. And it was, it's basics really, but he's so good at those basics. He's always been, the best right back in the world, or one of the best right backs in the world. So it almost goes back to what Klopp said all those years ago. Why would you deprive yourself of the best right back in the world? And I think Slot's gone back to those basics in some ways. We have seen him popping up in some central positions. You probably could still call it a hybrid role if you were so inclined. But I think I have overall liked what I've been seeing from him. He's been unlucky really with some goals and assist tallies. He's not really been racking them up. Of course, there was the disallowed one against United. There've been couple of sort of passes before the passes. There have been some where the finish hasn't quite been there, but I think it's coming given what we have seen from him. It's been encouraging. So yeah, I think on the whole, plenty more winners than losers under Slot, and of the losers, there's still time for all of them to come good really, but certainly most of them you would expect they'll have chances, as you say, in the coming weeks where fixtures come thick and fast, and we're talking about some really tricky games. So big tests on the horizon, but very promising start for Slot. We're very pleased to see it, and long may it continue. That's just about all we have time for on the Liverpool.com podcast. Matt, thanks very much for joining me. We'll be back again very soon, so keep an eye on the Blood Red channel for more content, and of course head over to Liverpool.com where we have plenty of written content for you every day. But for now, thanks for watching.